Good evening. On behalf of President Mary Schmidt Campbell and Provost Sharon Davies, it is my distinct honor to welcome you to tonight's event hosted by the Center of Excellence for Minority Women in STEM, funded by the Department of Defense. My name is Tasha Ennis, and I serve as the Associate Provost for Research here at Spelman College, and also as the Principal Investigator for the grant that established the Center of Excellence for Minority Women in STEM. Dr. Tamara Pearson, who was supposed to be with you tonight, extends her regrets. She is unable to facilitate tonight due to a family emergency. Please do keep her and her family, send them many positive thoughts and energy. So this is the third talk in the Women in STEM Speaker Series and the first one of the spring 2021 semester. The purpose of this series is to highlight the interdisciplinary work of women of color in STEM. Each year there's a theme, and as you can well imagine, this year's theme is COVID-19. Last semester, we were honored to have Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett of the National Institutes of Health to give the inaugural keynote because she is the scientific lead for the development of the Moderna vaccine. We also hosted a panel of Spelman alumni who are also making valuable contributions related to the pandemic, and that was called Spelman on the Front Lines. I am so pleased to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Mrs. Lola A. Williams. She is the program manager for She is the program manager for the U.S. Army Medical Material Development Activity, the Department of Defense's Medical Product Development activity for products designed to protect and preserve the lives of the warfighter. As the program manager, Mrs. Williams guides the development of medical products for the U.S. Army Medical Department, other U.S. services, the Joint Staff, the Defense Health Agency, and the U.S. Special Forces community. This process takes promising technology from the DoD, industry, and academia to U.S. forces, from the testing required for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, approval or licensing, to fielding and sustainment of the finished product. For the last 9 months, Mrs. Williams has been on special detailed assignment, utilizing her experience as a program manager to provide support to Operation Warp Speed, OWS. The U.S. government rapid response to provide vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Focused more on the therapeutic side, Mrs. Williams supported the team that issued one of the first emergency use authorization for a therapy to combat COVID-19 convalescent plasma, assisted with efforts to launch a national education campaign on COVID-19 therapies, assisted in establishing manufacturing capabilities and the distribution of therapies throughout the United States. In addition, Mrs. Williams has had to coordinate with various teams within OWS to include vaccines and diagnostics, to develop education materials on how these products work and are beneficial on the fight against COVID-19. A native of Silver Spring, Maryland, Mrs. Williams graduated from Trinity University with a bachelor's degree in biology in 2006. She also holds a master's degree in biotechnology and a master's of business administration degree from Johns Hopkins University. Mrs. Williams currently resides in Frederick, Maryland with her husband and 3 daughters. So, just as logistics, if you have any questions, you can put it in the Q&A. We will be sure to take questions at the end of what we know will be a dynamic talk. So thanks again, Mrs. Williams, for being here, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And so now I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ennis. That was an amazing introduction, and I am so excited and so happy to be here. Being able to share, what I've learned and the incredible work, just not of what I've been doing, but our entire team in regards to combating COVID. So I know the hot topic of discussion right now is, the COVID-19 vaccine. And I'll go through a little bit of what that looks like. We've been hearing about the slow vaccine rollout, and what are some things that is causing that, a little digging into the process, and then what are some things that need to get done in order to get those vaccines into the shots of the public. So I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay. So again, just a little bit of the agenda. I'll go into the background, talk a little bit just about what Operation Warp Speed was doing. How did we get to the authorizations for these 2 vaccine products? What goes into the prioritization, allocation, and distribution? To date, how many vaccines have been used, and what's really causing those slow uptick in numbers? And then we'll also look into just a quick case study of COVID-19 convalescent plasma, what made that effort successful, and how that can be applied to the vaccine distribution, and then what is next. So Operation Warp Speed is a multi-agency effort in collaboration with various U.S. agencies, so Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, and also working with the private sector to protect the American people from future COVID-19 devastation. OWS, we're not called OWS anymore, we're now called Federal COVID Response. So I kind of feel like Prince, the group that formerly was, but we worked in providing funding, coordination, regulatory support, logistics support, anything in order to rapidly develop and distribute novel diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And most of my work that I've been doing have been working and focusing on the therapeutics effort, but for today's focus, we'll be talking about the vaccines, and how we were able to get to where we are. So a little bit about the vaccine delivery milestones from Operation Warp Speed. And really they've broken it down, and this is how I'm going to break it down for the talk this evening as well. Is first, we need to do whatever we need to do to get that authorization, that approval. And the regulatory agency that does that is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And right now, the 2 vaccines do have an EUA, which means that these products can be used in case of an emergency. And I'll go a little bit into detail about some of the data that was necessary to obtain that authorization and approval. From there, we need to figure out, okay, so we have this vaccine, who's going to get it? How are we going to get it to them? And so that we can make sure that they are getting into the shots of the American public in order to slow down the disease. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and what are the things that go into that. So in December 2020, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, they did issue emergency use authorization for 2 vaccines. So on December 11th, it was a Pfizer vaccine for the prevention of coronavirus disease, COVID-19, and that was for individuals 16 years of age and older. And December 18th, Moderna also received a EUA, same indication, but it was for individuals that were 18 years of age and older. And an emergency use authorization is really a mechanism that provides the agency to use medical countermeasures, including vaccines, during public health emergencies. So just because a product has received an EUA, and this is an important point, doesn't necessarily mean that it has obtained full FDA approval. So these products are unapproved, and they may be being used in unapproved uses, but data will continue to be collected and fed into the agency to determine if it does receive full approval. Typically with an EUA, it shows that the drug product is safe and may be effective for the intended use. And typically for an EUA, the company who's the sponsor will need to submit data. They'll need to submit clinical data. So there's a studies in humans that show the safety and the efficacy of the product. You'll submit non-clinical, so that's animal studies also showing the safety and effectiveness. With animal studies, you are able to provide certain products and then challenge them with the virus, whereas that's unethical to do in humans. And so you also use that data to provide the compelling story that your product is either safe and may be effective. And the last piece, which is so important, because you can have all this data, but then you have to make sure that you can produce the product and actually get it into the arms of the American public. And so that section is called the Chemistry, Manufacturing, and Controls, or CMC, and it ensures that the quality and the consistency of the manufactured vaccine product. So I'm just going to touch a little bit just on how the mRNA vaccines work. I know that Dr. Corbett really went and did a deep dive into this, but now that we've had the approval, we have more of a better idea of how they work. And so what happens is, once the person, sorry, let me back up. So in the lab, the scientist generates the mRNA sequence, and what it does, it codes for the protein that's on the surface of the virus. And there are different proteins, and the most popular one, or the one that's been focused on, really is a spike protein. What happens then is that the RNA sequence is then now coded inside of a lipid coating. The mRNA just as itself won't be able to get into the cell unless it's in that lipid coating. So that's manufactured, it's bottled up into these vials, and then it's injected into the person. Once it arrives, the cells, they read that information, and then they start to sequence the actual spike protein on the cell. And then the body starts to develop antibodies to those spike proteins. What happens, the mRNA will then disappear. And so if someone then comes in contact with the virus itself, your body already has the antibodies in order to block the virus from getting into the cells, and also stopping the virus from making copies of itself. So just wanted to do a little bit of comparison of the two vaccines that received the authorization, Pfizer and the Moderna. So both of them really showed that they were very effective. Pfizer was a little bit more effective at preventing symptomatic COVID-19 infection than Moderna, but still the 94% and the 95% are very, very good. For the Pfizer vaccine, it's 30 microgram each, and you receive one shot and then another shot in 21 days. For the Moderna vaccine, it's 100 micrograms, and you receive your second shot after 28 days. Both of the vaccines are reactogenic, which means that when you do receive the shot, you will have some type of symptoms. And actually, I received my first dose of the Moderna vaccine. I had a sore arm, my neck was a little stiff. That lasted for about 2 days, but some people may have low-grade fever, some people may have shivers and chills. But what that means is your body's immune response to the mRNA. So that's a good sign that it's working. Some people did have allergic reactions. I've seen that more with the Pfizer vaccine than the Moderna, and it may be some of the byproducts that they use for the vaccine itself. Now, the challenge with the Pfizer vaccine is that it has to be shipped at minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. That is super, super cold. And so that means it's going to require a little bit more logistics. And I'll get into this in a little bit more in the presentation. And it's good for 5 days at regular refrigerator. For the Moderna vaccine, you could just ship that at your regular refrigerator freezer. So that's 4 degrees, and it's good for 30 days at refrigerator temperature, and it's good for 12 hours at room temp. So Moderna vaccine seems to be a little bit more stable at various temperature conditions. And then also, I know this is the new thing, right? So we've been hearing a lot about these variants. They're making the virus more transmissible. Doesn't seem as though it's more it's causing to be more deadlier or causing an increase in mortality. But it's good to know that both of these seem, early data seems to suggest that they are quite effective against the UK variant as well as the South African and Latin American variants, which we've already seen pop up here in the US. So this schematic really just shows, and it's so important, shows how we got to where we've gotten to, right? So typically for traditional vaccine development, everything is in a sequential step. So you'll do some exploratory preclinical designs and studies. You'll start to do some preclinical studies. So maybe you'll start in some type of rodent model, and then you'll go to a larger model, and then eventually we'll get to your non-human primates. You'll then submit what we call an investigational new drug application, and that will allow for you to start your human clinical trials. And typically you'll have your phase 1, which will be your first in human, maybe some dose escalating studies, but really it's to determine, is this product safe? Phase 2 is your confirmatory safety, and you'll get some initial efficacy. So how effective is this vaccine or drug product? And then phase 3 will be your confirmatory safety and efficacy trials. And each of those trials, we're ranging from 100 patients to thousands of patients across varying demographics. Sometimes they're located just in the US, but typically they are global clinical trials. And just to organize something like that is such a major feat. After you get all that data and package it up, you'll submit what you call a biological licensing application. That'll be submitted to the FDA. They will take about maybe a year to review, and then you can start large scale production and distribution. And even during that time, the FDA is reviewing, they will come back and ask for questions. We need some clarification. They'll need to do a site visit of your multiple manufacturing facilities, look through all your quality documents. It's definitely a rigorous but lengthy process. For the SARS CoV-2 or the COVID-19 vaccines, a lot of the technology had already been developed and been worked on before. So I'm sure Dr. Corbett talked a little bit about some of how long she had been working on it. And even Moderna, really what their company, and I just found this out, Moderna stands for, I believe, modern RNA. And so that is something that they were, that is their bread and butter. That's what they have been working on before, the COVID-19 pandemic. So, okay, they're easily to say, hey, we have this technology. Let's do some preclinical animal studies. They did that in a couple months. They submitted that IND. And what they were able to do for the clinical trials, when instead of it being sequentially like what we've seen in traditional vaccine development, the FDA, and this is a move that the FDA has been moving to, is having an adaptive design or an agile design where you're able to overlap clinical trials. And so you're not taking 2 years to do another, then another 2 years, and then another 3 years. You're able to combine those. And if you say, okay, we've met the certain safety endpoint in this trial, we can continue to enroll more patients and start to look at efficacy. And then maybe we can enroll more patients and get to that confirmatory. So it really cuts down the timeline. And it's not something that's just being used for the COVID-19 vaccine development. I actually even have one of my other DoD programs where we're actually using an adaptive phase 2-3 design in order to accelerate getting, blood products to the warfighter. So it's really exciting, to see this flexibility and really taking that time off to get these products to market. After that, and also what they've moved up in this process as well is manufacturing. And so typically you can manufacture at risk and have the FDA come in and look, do the same quality checks, look at your SOPs and all of those different things. And so once you've done that and you have all that data, you submit the BLA, you can also ask the agency for an expedited review. And typically they will do those if there is one, a pandemic or a national public health emergency, or this is a novel product or receives an orphan drug status where we really need to get the product to the public ASAP. And so that's what the regulatory agency did here. And that's how we were able to get a vaccine in about 10 months, which is extraordinary. So I just wanted to go through a little bit of the clinical data that Pfizer presented in order to receive the authorization. So their data was a randomized double-blinded study, and about 43,000 participants underwent randomization. And what that means is they were either received the vaccine or they received a placebo. And then all participants were followed for safety and the development of COVID-19 2 months post-injection. So the primary endpoint for safety was specific or at systemic adverse events and the use of any pain medication within 7 days after the receipt of each dose. And then for the efficacy, it was, did the vaccine, was there any onset of COVID-19 symptoms at least 7 days after the second dose? When a patient had already tested negative prior to receiving those injections. And as you can see in the data here, those who received the vaccine, the amount of incidence, percent of incidence was very, very low compared to those that received placebo. So this really showed that the vaccine does work. But there will be continued clinical trials to continue to assess the safety. So as the participant pool grows, you may start to see additional side effects. And then also really, is that efficacy a lot lower? Is it a lot longer? And then also the biggest thing is how long does our immune response last after we've been given the vaccine? And that's still going to be ongoing for both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And so the clinical data for Moderna, they enrolled a little less, about 10,000 less volunteers. And they were also randomized, so they either received the vaccine or placebo. Safety primary endpoint was pretty much the same, as well as efficacy. For the efficacy, they were looking at COVID onset 14 days post the second injection. And then also for the safety, they were looking at 28 days after each injection. And all of this data is contributed to why you have to wait 28 days for the Moderna vaccine between injections, vice 21 for Pfizer. And as you can also see here with the incidences, those who receive the Moderna vaccine, a lot less developed symptomatic COVID than to those who receive the placebo. And then just a little bit about the chemistry, manufacturing controls, the CMC. So again, this is so important because the manufacturing of the product, this is what is actually going to go into people's arms. So we have to make sure that there is complete details of the manufacturing process. It's validated. There is a quality component that makes sure that each vaccine is the same as the next one, right? So lots, there should be minimal variation between the lots that are produced for the vaccine. You have to have a plan to test for product safety, quality, potency. So also to make sure that each vaccine dose is effective as the last. And then also stability data, right? So we talked about the -94 and the stability at 5 days at room temperature, at refrigeration. So that all came from rigorous stability tests to determine, okay, where does the effectiveness of the product start to decline? And this is where we can go ahead and label that. Also, expectations from manufacturing facilities. So they have to be what we call current good manufacturing processes. And the FDA has a whole list of requirements and regulations in order to say that your facility is in CGMP compliant. If it is not, you will not be able to manufacture a drug product that can be released to the public. And this right here, this schematic is just showing various vaccine manufacturing process. And you'll have egg-based vaccines. So that is typically how a lot of our vaccines are manufactured. So when you hear you had a live attenuated a live attenuated vaccine, typically they would probably use an egg-based or cell-based vaccine manufacturing process. They are very labor intensive. They require the use of actual virus. So which means that you'll have to be using them in some type of biosafety level 2 or 3, depending on how easily transmissible the virus is. You'll have to scale them up in these large bioreactors. Then you'll have to purify them, fill them, and then put them into the arms of, of people. That's a process that can take a very, very long time. I had to do this before in the lab. And so you're sitting in CGMP suites, injecting eggs, and it's very labor intensive, very, I would say, traditional and old school. But then as you move to some of these RNA or viral vector vaccines, you can see one, you don't need a live virus, which is great, right? So you don't have to be in a biosafety level 2 or 3. And oh, by the way, those biosafety levels, labs, have to be qualified, they have to be maintained. And because of that, you don't have very many across the country. And you're able to do that on a very small scale. You're able to rapidly scale up with the RNA and viral vector vaccines. And after you purify them, so you're not doing these large scale purifications, something that requires maybe a smaller suite, a smaller footprint, you do the purification, fill finish, and then you can vaccinate. And according to Moderna, that process is about 63 days. So this is just a little bit more granular schematic, talking about the mRNA vaccine manufacturing process. And so what happens is you make the plasmid DNA, and you amplify that in an E. coli bacteria. You'll take that and you purify that. And then you'll transcribe that with your mRNA, and it will start to express that. Excuse me. So then at that point, you can do some filtration and chromatography, and you'll go ahead and isolate your mRNA, and you'll confirm that with HPLC. From there, you'll put your RNA into your lipid nanoparticles. You'll do some quality control to make sure that, yes, this is indeed what you need. You'll fill it into the vials, cap it. You'll do some type of quality check again, you'll label, and then you'll ship out your vaccine product. So after the FDA, so we've manufactured our product, we received authorization. Okay, now what do we do, right? So once the FDA authorizes the vaccine, the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, so CDC, will provide a recommendation of who should be vaccinated first, second, third, because we know that the initial supplies are going to be limited. There is an organization called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, and they provide advice and guidance to the director of the CDC regarding the use of the vaccines. And when they make their decision process, they use a framework, right? So how can it maximize benefit and minimize harms? How can it mitigate health inequities, promote justice, and also promote transparency? So based on the ACIP recommendation, these were the proposed phases in which the COVID-19 vaccination should be rolled out. And I know we've all heard of like the different phases, 1A, 1B, 1C, 2, but this is what the CDC had recommended. So for your 1A, it is going to be those in your long-term care health facilities, so your nursing home residents, and then also your healthcare providers, so your doctors, your nurses, those that are in direct contact with positive COVID patients. For phase 1B, you'll have your frontline workers. So those will be paramedics, firefighters, police officers, those that also have more of a direct, but maybe not in a healthcare, not in a hospital setting. And then 1C is going to be those who are 65 to 74 years of age, those that are other essential workers, so maybe post office, store workers, those that are considered essential, but are not necessarily maybe dealing with COVID positive patients directly. And then also 16 to 64 years old with high risk medical conditions. So if they're immunocompromised, have autoimmune disease, maybe respiratory issues, they would then be considered for phase 1C. And then phase 2 is pretty much everyone else. And this is just the same chart, just a breakdown to kind of show how many people are in these groups, right? So it's a lot of people. So when you hear, okay, we purchased 100 million, doses of the vaccine, well, that's really not a lot, right? I mean, everyone needs 2 doses. So really that's only vaccinating 50 million people. And 50 million people is just only takes care of 1B. So just to kind of put into perspective, there's a lot of people, that we need to get vaccinated in those first couple of groups. And the government is really trying to make sure that there's an equitable and fair distribution of these vaccines. Just some of the data that was used to make some of those prioritization decisions. So this is just showing that although COVID-19 incidence is highest in young adults, mortality rates are highest in older adults. And so this is factored into why, the 75 plus population is considered to get vaccinated first. Why those in a long-term care facility, and then those with underlying, medical conditions, because we're really trying to decrease the mortality. And the next few slides just kind of talk through the ethical principles of each of these different groups. So for, the age 75 years and the older adults, this really, again, reduces the morbidity and the mortality, right? So it only makes sense that they should receive the vaccine first. You want to be able to save lives, because if you don't, and you know that you could help someone, but you couldn't, I mean, that could be considered malpractice. So that's part of why they were part of the priority groups. Also, frontline essential workers, right? They're at high risk of exposure. So if you can prevent them from getting the disease, then they don't have to transmit it. It's not as transmissible. Also, essential workers, they can't work from home, they can't telework, they can't isolate, right? So they have to continue to be out in the public, and they have frequent interactions with other people. And even with the health inequities, a quarter of essential workers live in low income families. So we have to address that as well. So persons from 16 to 64 with high risk medical conditions. So again, it reduces the morbidity and mortality, but it's a moderate to high burden. And actually focusing on those who have limited or no access to healthcare. And that's how they would address the health inequities as well. So now that you prioritize, you now need to allocate. So which states are going to receive the vaccine? So specific amounts of these vaccines are made available to states and jurisdictions. And what the government used was called a pro rata vaccine distribution. And this is actually changing right now. So initially, this is how they were doing this. It was determined in direct proportion to the nation's adult population. So they would take a state and say, okay, they have this many people that are 18 years and older. They would put in some manufacturing estimates, and then they would kind of divide that amongst the population that was there. And they used that data. The data that they received for that was from the American Community Survey, so based on the US Census Bureau. And they also had to figure out how do we deal with the territories, the Native American community, things like that. And so when this was developed, they thought that this was a great way to do that, and realized quickly, like, this may not be it. So right now there's going to be a shift, and the new administration is calling for prioritizing for those that are 65 and above. And if you can get enough of those doses allocated to the states, then it should really take care of that high risk population. And then once the vaccines are allocated, it's up to each jurisdiction or agency, state, in order to designate how they're gonna get those into the public. And that has really been causing some issues. And so as of last week, about 97 million doses have been allocated to the states. So this is just a schematic of the vaccine distribution process. And I'll just, pull out some key points. And so for the products are manufactured, the government is procuring them, has a contracts for them. They're also playing like a logistical and supply chain role. But the vaccines are then given to distributors, and McKesson is one of the central distribution sites, and then they are shipped out to administration sites. It's a little bit different for Pfizer because they have the very cold storage, and so Pfizer is actually doing the shipping of their product to the sites directly. And then it's not just the vaccine. You still need your syringes, you need your needles, you need your alcohol swabs. That comes as an ancillary kit, but you cannot provide, any vaccines without those. And those are also being distributed through a central distributor, which is McKesson as well. And then those have to be shipped to the same sites that the vaccine has been shipped to. So it's such a complex process, right? We have to be able to make sure the vaccine and the kits, the same number, arrive to the same place at the same time. We have to make sure that they are maintaining their storage and shipping, requirement temperatures. So for the Pfizer, they're using dry ice because it's so cold. And then you have to make sure that the sites have the ultra cold freezers in order to store. And that has really become a problem. A lot of sites cannot accept or store the Pfizer vaccine. So currently right now, 70 million doses have been delivered. About 52 million doses have been administered. And again, we're talking, we need at least 1 billion doses. So we're making some progress, but we're not quite there yet. About 38 million have received one or more doses, and about 14 million have received 2 doses. So we got to figure out how do we get these numbers up to get people vaccinated. And so some challenges with this vaccine rollout, and I've listed a few here, really the allocating the vaccines and the materials. Some facilities remain confused about how many doses they'll be given in a week. Sometimes they don't get that information to a couple of days before. So then they're scrambling to figure out, okay, where are we going to put these doses? And then once we get them, how do we get people to actually sign up to receive a vaccine? And I'm sure we've all heard about the challenges and the stories about signing up, and how do we get slots and things like that. And so that's been very difficult. And then each state is doing things differently, right? And so although the CDC provided a recommendation on how these vaccines should be allocated and distributed, it's really up to the states on how they feel as though they want to do that. And so it's really caused a lot of confusion. It's caused, we've heard some stories in the news where the doctors were vaccinated, but then the students in medical school were not. While they are attending to COVID-19 patients, how did they get left out of the mix? So things like that. And then people are jumping the COVID vaccine line. I didn't think that this would become an issue, but it really is. So people are lying or using their influence and trying to get the COVID vaccine when they're really people who need it. Then sometimes what happens is, there's some miscommunication, right? And then, a facility may realize they have extra vaccine. And so instead of letting it go to waste, they just start injecting, random people. And so how do you find that balance there, right? And so that's causing some issues as well. And people simply just don't want to take the vaccine. So I'll go into that in a little bit. And I am also wary of my time, so I will kind of speed it up a little bit. And then data communication. There's not really a lot of effective communication or unified communication or consistent communication across the private and public spheres. So we really need to strengthen that infrastructure in order to communicate this vital health information. And so I posted these memes. I've seen these multiple times on my social media. Government workers, yes, okay, let us be the guinea pigs. And you'll see these. I got my COVID-19 vaccine, and they're turning into the guy from the Goonies. But this is real. A lot of people are like, yep, it's not for me. I'm not going to take it. And part of it is, the previous medical experiments on people of color, right? So Tuskegee is the famous one, Henrietta Lacks, and also Vertus Hardiman, who was, part of a radiation treatment. He thought he was getting treated for ringworm, and that ended up not to be the case, right? In conjunction with that, there's just a historical lack of access and care and disparities in care, to people of color. And, we in the minority community are aware of this long history of being disrespected and mistreated and violated by the government and by healthcare professionals. So even if you take it out of vaccines, I mean, how many times do we hear just about Black women and childbirth, right? More Black women die of childbirth than, the white women. And so those are all things that feed to vaccine hesitancy. There has been an increase in the anti-vaxxer movement, which is really just, people feel as though taking vaccines are infringing on their human rights. And then also, there was not a scientifically sound study where they said the MMR vaccine causes autism in children. And I hear that all the time, and so that has really caused some people not to take the vaccine. then the vaccine would change our genes and our DNA, and it's the way for the government to microchip and track people. And so my thing on that is, they have my social security number, they have my driver's license number. I don't think they need a microchip to go ahead and track me. And then this is a valid one. The vaccine is not around long enough to study the side effects, right? So, that data, and that's where we need to be transparent. The data is coming, it will be shared, and it needs to be shared to the public. And so I just wanted to go through a case study, and this product is so near and dear to my heart because I worked labor of love on the COVID-19 convalescent plasma, and really how we can take this and how do we apply it to reducing some of that vaccine hesitancy and increase the usage of vaccines, knowing that there is still a supply chain issue where we just still need to purchase and manufacturing additional doses. So real quick, so COVID-19 convalescent plasma is where you take plasma from a recovered COVID-19 patient. And that plasma has antibodies that can be infused currently into the sick patient who's in the hospital. And the thought is when you transfuse those antibodies, it helps the sick patient's body fight off the COVID-19 infection. So plasma can only be obtained by donation. So we can't manufacture in a lab. And so it takes people's will, effort, and time in order to provide the plasma. There was an EUA issued for the product in August of 2020, but it came under a lot of scrutiny because at that time, the former president was pressuring the FDA commissioner to issue this EUA. So with all of those different things, we're in a pandemic, I'm sick and I'm recovered from COVID-19. And now, the administration, I feel like it's being politicized. I don't want to go ahead and give my plasma. So how do you encourage people to do that with everything that's going on? And we were actually very, very successful. So what we did was we launched a national and targeted education and outreach campaign. And it had 3 tiers. So you had a national awareness by public health officials. So the former Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, he was great, an advocate for us. He did PSAs and testimonials and local interview radios. I mean, he really was a champion, and he really resonated with a lot of people. We also did strategic outreach to COVID-19 positive patients nationally, and we did that through LabCorp, Quest Diagnostics, hospital associations, anyone that had access to and can provide the information to COVID-19 positive patients. We try to leverage their communication channels. And then the biggest thing was the community engagement in 25 areas with the highest prevalence of COVID-19 infections. And we tapped local and community leaders and influencers to amplify the message. PSAs and testimonials from people in the community that look and sound like me. We had an active mis and disinformation campaign. So with all the negative information and disinformation that was out there, we had to counter that and utilized local radio, TV, and print to get people, because not everybody has social media or the internet. And we literally had boots on the ground to actually bring those donation capabilities into the community so people can donate their plasma. And so with that, we were able to collect over 700,000 units of CCP. And to date, about 600,000 have been distributed to hospitals to treat patients. So what's next? This is my last slide. I know I'm looking at the time. I didn't realize I could talk this much, but we have to increase the vaccine allocation and distribution. We have to establish a national communication strategy. The state and local health officials, they need more dedicated support. They don't have the resources, they don't have the staff, they don't have the funds. They're doing contact tracing, diagnostic testing, trying to open up, schools, and now you want them to help with vaccination. They need more. Also, we need better IT systems to track. So how do you find the 20-year-old that has an underlying health condition to say, hey, you now qualify for the vaccine, right? And we need to reevaluate that vaccine allocation strategy, which I think they're doing right now. Continue clinical trials to authorize additional vaccines. 2 pipelines is not enough. We're going to need more, right? And you have to engage your local and community leaders to encourage our community to take the vaccine. The government can't talk. You need those that are trusted, who are influencing in the community, and you need boots on the ground to be able to make those vaccines available. Tackle misinformation and disinformation. So when those memes that you see, you have to counter that, right? That's you can't just let it sit there, because people start to think that that's really the case. We have to remain anchored in the science and the data, not the politics. Science and data is what is driving us toward that. Be transparent with that, and that will get there. And then again, remove the structural barriers that exist. You have to be able to give those vaccines in the areas that typically maybe don't have access to healthcare, or it's difficult for them to access. You have to be able to get the vaccine into those communities. So that's all I have. Thank you guys so much. I'm sorry I did go over time a little bit, but happy to take questions. I see the Q&A is blowing up.
Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. Williams. That was such an informative talk, and I am sure that I am speaking on behalf of everyone to say that was just excellent. I appreciated you talking about the whole process, of the vaccine development, to prioritization, to the ethical principles. And so we do have some questions in Q&A. We have about 9 minutes for those questions. And just in the interest of time, what I'll do is, if someone asks more than one question, then we'll just take one of their questions. And if we can get to all of them, we will.
Okay.
And so are you able to see the Q&A?
I am. So
Okay.
let me see. Okay.
Because I can read the questions, or you can make the choice of the questions that you would want to answer.
Sure. So the first one, how long do the mRNA and spike proteins remain in the cells? So that I'm not sure of. I'll have to maybe go back and get some more information. But my understanding is that it's not very long. And I think, I'm have to go back and confirm what the half-life of that would be. But to my understanding, it's not very long. And that's why you need that second booster, right? And then the mRNA kind of goes away pretty quickly. And then you have the antibodies that are in your body. Now, what still needs to be determined as well is how long the antibodies remain in your body. But that's something that we can follow up on, and I can get some additional information for you. And then you also asked, what additional requirements must be met to secure FDA approval? So if you're talking about full FDA approval, so not just emergency use authorization, it's still going to be, the clinical data, non-clinical, and the manufacturing. But for the clinical, you'll have to have completed a full phase 3 study. So sometimes, depending on the endpoint, you may need additional volunteers. Also, there may be a length of time that is required to follow these volunteers and participants. And then also you have to do what's a phase 4, which is pharmacovigilance. So that's safety monitoring after you receive the approval, and that all has to go into the package. So really, at this point, to say get those Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, it's just going to be additional follow-up clinical trial data and the safety and efficacy, and then how they are going to do the follow-up after that. Okay, so when do you think they may begin trials in younger children? I believe another vaccines are pausing. Yes, so AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson do have vaccines in progress. I believe that Moderna and Pfizer are also looking to do studies. So that's another, and actually that kind of goes back to the initial question. They're going to have to look at pediatrics. So, and then also pregnant and lactating women. There's really not a lot of data. So my understanding is that those are the next trials to begin. I don't know if they've started or where they are, but you can always go on clinicaltrials.gov that has all of the clinical trials that are going on, and they have a special section just for COVID-19. But I can go back and also check on that as well.
Can you, Mrs. Williams, go to Susan Dunn's question, and we'll
Okay.
go back to the other questions.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts you can share for individuals who had confirmed cases of COVID and getting vaccinated? I'm planning to get vaccinated. I feel like other people might even should get the shot first from a moral perspective. If I have a single, just like a Jane, I understand I should just listen. I'm just wondering. Sure. So I would say still get vaccinated, right? So, and it's all going to be to where do you fall in that priority as well. Part of, and the biggest thing is we don't know how long the immune response lasts for. So although you may have natural immunity, it doesn't hurt to continue to have that immunity. We've also seen cases of reinfection, although they are very, very low. Ooh, okay. Reinfection, although they are very, very low. So, if you feel as though you fall into that priority category, and maybe if you got COVID, like maybe when the pandemic first started, I would not rule out getting the vaccine, and completely understand there are some who are naive that haven't been exposed to COVID. So I get you want to let them have their vaccine. But I think, if you fall into any of those categories, continue to, I would still consider getting vaccinated, because we just don't know how long the immunity lasts for.
So just for the benefit of the recording, maybe reading the question out loud. Would you like me to read it, or?
Sure. I mean, I can.
Okay.
Let's see. So, all right. Also, when is the next data cut for both of these trials? For the Moderna and the Pfizer. I'm not sure about that one.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. They just, the trials are still ongoing. So we're still actively recruiting for clinical trials for both of those vaccines. I'm not sure when registration is going to close for those, but I can find out. If you also go to combatcovid.hhs.gov, there's actually information on those trials as well. So you'll be able to see which trials are actively recruiting for, how many participants they need. And so all of that information is on there as well.
So let me jump to, in the last 2 minutes, I'll try to
Okay.
get you 2 more questions. The question, when testing the efficacy of the vaccine in the control and experimental groups, the double-blind study, was the data based on infections after intentional exposure to the virus or after random chance exposure to the virus, as occurs when performing ordinary routine activities?
That is such a great question. So you can't intentionally expose humans to a virus, right? So that's unethical. And for the vaccine trials, they try to recruit people that are high risk for contracting the disease. So those who are essential workers, maybe those who work in the hospital setting, those who just have an increased chance of getting the virus. Now, there's been some debate on that, right? Because, well, how do you know that it's 95% effective? What if the person just never was exposed to the virus? How do you know that it really works? And again, they really try to focus on those who had an increased likelihood of getting the virus. So it'd be the second, to answer your question, more of a random chance of exposure, but there wasn't any intentional, at least on the study side. Now, if a person was like, hey, Bob, cough on me so I can get COVID to see what happens. I mean, that's, we can't control the participants, but that was not the intention.
So the last question, and then we'll close this dynamic event. So thanks for such an informative presentation. Do you have any data as to when vaccines will be available for those of us who are not in group 1? Thank you.
So that is the $1 million question, right? And now it seems, even from when I presented, group 1 now seems to include teachers, right? So in an effort to open up the school, so teachers, teacher administrators are now being bumped up, I believe, to 1B or 1C, depends on the state. But yeah, for those that are not in group 1, we saw that, I showed the numbers, right? So we're looking at, what was it, 49 plus 24. I mean, we're looking at, maybe almost 200 million people, that they would have to vaccinate before they would get to group 2. We're not quite halfway there, maybe 35%. So, but again, each state is also doing things different. So, I would just keep looking out, listening to what your state health department is sending out. Sometimes they're allowing people to sign up for vaccinations. But as far as group 2, just based on the numbers, it may be like May. Some of the modeling I've been seeing is like May, June, July timeframe.
So those are all such excellent questions, and I do apologize that we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but we thank you. And Mrs. Williams, on behalf of everyone from the Spelman community who has been in attendance, from our senior leaders, our Spelman students, faculty, alumni, community members, we want to express our sincerest gratitude to you for such an excellent talk. And we wanted to be sure that you had a token of our appreciation. And so we did want to say thank you. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. This has been amazing. And I'm so glad that, I was able to give this talk, and so humbled to be in the presence of such amazing, amazing women. So thank you guys so much.
Well, you are an amazing woman. And I just wanted to say thank you to our Spelman Technology Services, Dr. Tamara Pearson, Director of the Center of Excellence for Minority Women in STEM, for organizing, and Mrs. Damika Taylor for her assistance. And thank you all for attending, for all the great questions, and we hope you have a great evening.